I think building your team and then trusting them is key. I used to be in the spaces every day, in the beginning, open to close. I mean, certainly as an owner that was obsessed with quality, obsessed with hospitality, customer service, all the little details. I can be pretty picky about the details. I've definitely had to learn to back off some. I think finding the right people, communicating your values, but then also relying on their skill sets and the fact that I want to surround myself with people that are better at me than all these, things that we have to juggle. And I don't think no business, no new endeavor is one person. It really takes a team.
So I am a firm believer that in order to understand someone, you need to have a few pieces of the early life puzzle.
Okay.
So what are the few pieces of your early life puzzle that I need to have or that we need to have in order to understand you?
That's a loaded question. I'm trying to think of the most relevant things. I was born and raised abroad, so the first time I came to the States that I remember, I was 14, almost 15. So I think growing up internationally, traveling a lot, it gave me a unique perspective on just people and places. And we moved at least every year growing up through my childhood. And lived in numerous countries. And I grew up specifically in Japan for a long time, and a lot of my interest in hospitality and food and beverage came from that time. And then my wife and I, later in our life, lived in Italy, and that sort of kind of galvanized that.
So most people that say they moved a lot usually are military brats. You alluded early in the conversation that your parents were kind of hippies. So I'm going to venture out and say that they had something to do with that.
Sure, yeah, it was. Yeah, they weren't military. My parents played music and taught English and had a bunch of kids along the way. And we traveled, all through Europe into Southeast Asia, and then eventually Japan. And then for specific reasons, we ended up staying in Japan for a long time, and then eventually moved back stateside. So as a 16, blonde 16-year-old kid moving back to North Carolina, but culturally completely different. It was quite a hell of a transition.
Talk about that transition. Talk about that transition from a kid that is well-traveled with, a pretty broad worldview to come to a place like the South, which at the time probably has nothing to do with the kind of cultural background that you came with.
Very different. Certainly different than a rural North Carolina outside of Charlotte. My parents moved to Monroe, and we had come from a city in Japan, living, in an urban area, probably, millions of people, at least. I would ride my bike downtown, had a lot of friends in a kind of a bustling Japanese city. So that was a big transition. The biggest thing, I was just telling a guy I met yesterday from Hong Kong that when we moved, getting into town, I was like, all right, well, I don't want to be stuck here at home, so how do I get into town? And I ended up walking down some country road for like 45 minutes in the dead of summer, and I was like, this is crazy. How do people get around here without a car? And I was like, I hadn't gotten my license yet. I was just about to turn 16. Yeah. So that was like the biggest shift, was sort of this like lack of independence and autonomy that we had, got to experience there.
I know as a 19-year-old moving from Cameroon to the US, that experience really was informative in terms of my understanding of myself, but I think it also helped with my understanding with people, people around me. Like, have you been able to reflect on how, as a 16-year-old, again, moving to rural North Carolina with the kind of worldview that you had, like, how did that shape your understanding of yourself and your understanding of people?
Yeah, that's interesting. It was a challenge. The first couple of years were a challenge, and as soon as I turned 18, I went back to Japan because it was just I missed my friends there. I missed the culture. I missed where I was comfortable, and then certainly traveled around a little bit more. Went down to South America and came back to the States, and I made a lot of friends here, and eventually got acclimated really well. Continued to travel. I think that the thing that it most resonated with me is just how important it is to see other people in other places. And obviously not everyone can do that. And I know that it's easier said than done. But my parents, managed a pretty unusual upbringing for us. And that's the part I'm most grateful for, is kind of having an understanding and a connection with other places and other people and other cultures.
Yeah. And I know when we are in our popular discourse, it seems that there is so much that separates us as people than bring us together. But once you travel, you quickly recognize that there is so much more that brings us together. Like, what have been your experience specifically to that point? That like you've been to all these places, but fundamentally there are so many things that we share as people, and just like shared human experience that we have that look different and sound different, but fundamentally really is the same.
Yeah, I think one thing I've always been impressed with, no matter where I've been, is when you are welcomed into any other environment that's different than where you come from. It's such an incredibly inspiring thing, and realizing that I feel like most people are eager to connect with others and eager to connect with people that are different than them and from different places. And certainly here in the States right now, I don't want to get too far down a political rabbit hole, but we definitely paint a picture that we're all, that everybody, two sides hate each other. Yeah. Whereas on an individual level, I think whether it's politically, whether it's religious, whatever it is, most people actually are eager to learn about, people that are different, or, experience things that are different. So I think it's a negative picture that's painted, that it doesn't fully articulate how the human experience is. And I know it's not a novel thought, but I've traveled to, places and just been welcomed into people's houses, or, experienced some really awesome conversations with a random person on a train, where you're stuck in the same car for hours. We talked about trains earlier in Europe. So
yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just this idea that, I talk a lot about empathy. So naturally people ask me, like, how can you become more empathetic? And I think, my advice, the number one piece that I always bring is you have to find ways to travel outside of the boundaries of your reality. And, you alluded earlier that everyone doesn't have the luxury to travel abroad. But I think especially in a country as culturally rich as the US, there are ample opportunities for people to venture outside of the confines of their reality, to experience different versions of it. And for me, like coming to America from Cameroon is like, you experience a completely different version of reality that is just as valid as the one that you left behind. And you realize that, oh, wow, there are multiple ways to experience reality, and they are all just true.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah, we just kind of, as people, we just kind of, we make it up as we go along, and everyone's just living the best life that you can. And I think anytime you can push yourself outside of that comfort zone, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and even digitally, I think algorithms are serving as nice echo chambers these days. It really requires for us to be intentional, to seek different opinion, to seek different versions, because our timelines are curated.
Yep.
They are curated.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of smart people building those things, right? Yeah, it's always wild when I get some ad, and I'm like, how is this ad so perfectly targeted to me?
So I don't consider myself a born entrepreneur. I always hear people talking about just early experiences. I started a little thing in my parents' garage. I had a paper route. I sold lemonade. Like, I did none of it. Sure. I was raised to be the perfect citizen that seeks the path of least resistance and looks for safety, go to school, get good grades, get a job. That was the path, and entrepreneurship just became this thing that I stumbled upon as I was unlearning some things and trying to find myself and trying to figure out different ways to contribute to this world. Like, what is your origin story when it comes to entrepreneurship? Like,
well, I certainly think that I definitely had a path that prepared me for entrepreneurship. Grew up, just moving a lot, for one. Created, the downside. Everything was not great in our upbringing, but moving a lot gave you kind of resilience and tenacity and experiencing different things. So those qualities by themselves are so important in entrepreneurship. And then, in my young adult life, I worked for different nonprofits, so was involved in a lot of different fundraising. And which in itself, if you're on a small scale nonprofit, you're essentially running your own business. And it kind of gave me living outside of a normal structure of I never went to school, for instance. So going to school, going to college, like a definitive path. I wasn't in that, in that road. So it was like I don't want to say it came easy, but the idea of starting a business was like, well, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, we had nothing to lose. My wife and I were completely broke when we started the business, and we had 3 little kids, and we were just like, all right, we have to do something. We just moved to Charlotte, and that was something that we were passionate about, was starting a business, and specifically in coffee. It's funny because people ask me all the time, like, how did you finally pull the trigger? How did you decide to open it? And it was like, well, we did. We had a little bit of cash and a credit card, and we were like, let's do it.
So, of all the things you've seen and all the influences you've had with that upbringing you just described for us, why coffee?
I love it. Ever since I was a teenager, going into coffee shops was always something I loved to do. And specifically the business, I think, is interesting in terms of creating spaces that are like, you get to interact with so many different people. I feel like coffee is appealing to a wide audience. It's a diverse customer base. I love the service industry. I loved hospitality. I wanted to, and once I touched an espresso machine for the first time and started making it, I fell in love with it. I was like, this is incredible. And being able to have customers come in, interact with them, because when I started the business, it was me behind bar, and getting to meet a new person every day was exciting to me. And 99% of my friendships and relationships that I have now in Charlotte came from that. And I'm so blessed for the amount of people and the interesting people and valuable friends that I have in my life through that.
Yeah. You mentioned in passing that your formative experience of hospitality took shape in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you elaborate on that? Like, what does that mean concretely?
So I grew up in Japan from when I was 15 until right before I turned 16, and not to generalize, but Japan is a very hospitable culture. Kind of by nature, they're very polite, very welcoming. If you're, whether it's going to someone's house or going into a restaurant, you're always greeted. You're always there's sort of a formal politeness to everything, which I just found interesting. And then growing up and, like I said, before, being abroad and having people welcome you into their house when they were strangers, or being so welcoming, definitely implanted those seeds of like hospitality and how I wanted to kind of pursue my career.
How do you then see those principles being applied in your understanding of the experiences that you provide
through the shops?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we have our goals of where we want to hit, and then we always fall short to some degree. But I feel like my goal would be that anyone who walks in feels immediately welcome. They feel like they are, that this can become part of their daily routine, and they're greeted. Our staff, if whether it's me or whether our staff who are serving them, over the years, know their name, know their favorite drinks. I mean, it's funny. I have people that I would serve coffee to 5 days a week. I knew everything about them. And every once in a while, I would forget their name. I'm terrible with names. And if they paid cash, I could never look at like a credit card. So I had people that I knew really well, and I still didn't know their name. So I always have like a little cheat, when I was behind bar, little cheat codes of ways to be able to figure out their name. But I'm just kind of rambling now. But yeah, I think giving a space where people feel engaged, feel part of it. A beautiful space is part of hospitality too. And certainly, a great product.
Yeah, no, I mean, talking about beautiful space and great product, you guys have really put together just an incredible concept, series of concepts, really. Because the brand has since expanded, right? Like, can you walk us through that evolution from that early first shop,
Sure.
with you behind the bar, to what now has become, a household name,
a few locations.
at least here.
At least for some households. At least my household.
And mine as well.
Yeah. So our very first location was at a place called Area 15 on 15th Street in Davidson. And it was this, my friend Carlos had bought this building and turned it into this creative space. There were small businesses, artists, attorneys, real estate, massage therapists. And we had the opportunity to open a little tiny coffee shop in about 250 square feet there. currently, the space is Bird Pizza, which I think is some of the best pizza in the city. So you should definitely go check them out. But in the beginning, you don't know what you're doing. I didn't know what I was doing. Like the thought of opening multiple locations never occurred to me. I was like, I'm gonna get behind bar and I'm gonna serve coffee. And as it grew, and as we realized we had a viable business, and when I brought great people into the company, it kind of changed the trajectory. We were able to open more locations, and we've continued bootstrapping it for locations 2 and 3, and my brother helped invest some in our cafes, and we continued to grow. And then 4 years ago, we created Night Swim Coffee with our business partners Todd and Aaron from Undercurrent Coffee. We partnered with another brand that were technically our competition, but we were good friends with them, and created a whole new brand that we're roasting under. You can see our coffee bags over there. And now we have 5 locations under that brand and 5 locations under Not Just Coffee, and then there are 2 Undercurrent Coffees.
What was it about those 2 brands that made that marriage make sense?
It's unusual. A lot of people, are confused by the idea of like why you would, partner or merge with a competitor. I think we both had, both teams, we had a vision for growth, and we had a vision for quality and how we wanted to serve Charlotte. And when we finally realized we were sharing a lot of information, we were getting a lot of the same leads from realtors. So many things were already happening that were kind of in tandem. And we one day kind of independently both threw it out to each other. Like, what about the idea of creating a new company together or merging? And kind of the rest just went from there. And it's certainly not easy. When you're own a business, whether it's by yourself or with a spouse, like my wife and I did, and the same for Todd and Aaron. You call all the shots. You're completely independent. Yeah. And now with business partners and a new kind of a new team, it's got its ups and downs and its challenges, but I still really believe in the growth plan and for what we're doing. But you have to compromise is a big part of it. You have to give and take. It can't always be the way I want it, right? And you have to be able to give and take, and you have to collaborate.
Yeah, now it makes complete sense. So I want to talk a little bit about like coffee shops. I feel like coffee shops just play such a vital and critical role into the life of a city. Like how do you think of the role that the spaces that you've created? How do you think about the role they play like in this little community that we call ours?
Yeah, I think I say this fairly often, but I think that coffee shops, in particular for F&B businesses, they occupy a really unique space because you have full service restaurants, you have bars, you have grab and go places, and that's a very transactional. People come there for a sole purpose. You sit, you eat, you leave. Coffee shops are a little more fluid than that, and the time people spend in the spaces can be a few minutes up to hours, right? And they really do become really no matter what type of coffee shop, they become kind of anchors in a neighborhood or a community, or they can be. They have the potential for that. And I've seen so many new businesses start in a coffee shop. I've seen engagements happen. I've seen meet cutes where people meet for the first time and then years later they're married.
First dates.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And especially behind bar, I would see, initial meetings, and then a year later they've started a successful business together.
Wow.
So it's just cool to see, and to be able to be a small part of that is interesting. To be able to create a space that gives people that space. And the same for me. I've met, like I had mentioned before, I've met so many people that are influential in my life now through this. And I feel like there's also an energy in a coffee shop that kind of it becomes like a team effort almost. It's like a group effort involving the neighborhood or the community to make that place a success. Yeah. And we function, when we're behind bar, we function like the daytime bartenders. We're not serving cocktails, but we're serving, caffeine and coffee and tea. And
so do people confess to their baristas the way they will drunkenly confess to a bartender?
Maybe a little more energetically. No, you'd be surprised with some of the conversations. When you're behind bar, you hear a lot. Yeah. Over time, you see the same people 7 days a week, and yeah, you can definitely hear some stuff unsolicited or not.
Yeah. So what does that experience What has that also taught you about people? Like watching, it's almost like you have this counter that almost protects you, but also gives you a front row view at like just the human experience, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you get to observe and watch, and in that experience, you also continue to gather data about just how people live and what makes us human.
Yeah, it's great. It's great people watching. I mean, nothing very specific comes to mind, but would say you can, I think like anything, you can learn a lot about a person's character with how they order and how they treat the baristas, how they treat staff, how they treat each other at the bar. Yeah. And I'm glad to say most people are very pleasant and very nice. Yeah. But every once in a while you see, the examples that aren't.
I want to take a slightly different tangent and maybe a lighter route to this conversation. Like, what are some of the, my wife's best friend is a flight attendant. Okay. And she will routinely tell us the things that flight attendants hate that passengers do, right? Like, so through her, we've kind of learned if you do this, if you do the lights, they'll hate you.
Like they're all talking shit about the person in 14C.
So, first of all, is there such a thing in the barista world? And if so, what are some of the things that I should be very aware of to make sure that I don't piss off my barista at my favorite coffee shop?
Yeah, there are definitely some things. Some are as small as like, I think remembering that, when we're behind bar, whoever's working in, whether it's coffee or whatever industry you're in, but when you're a barista, you're a person too. And, don't just walk up to the register and bark your order out. Say hi, You don't need to have a full conversation, but, start it like a normal person would if you ran into a stranger on the street. So, that's one thing. Historically, we've had very few customers, but we've had a few customers that rather than ordering an iced latte, will order an espresso on ice, and then they'll go to the stand and fill it up with half and half. So they're taking a $2 drink and turning it into a $7 drink. So we've seen that. We mostly roll our eyes, but now you can see we've taken our half and half off the counters. So yeah, that's funny. But yeah.
That's good.
There's always a few. There's always a few little things like that. So if you make sure you say hi.
There we go. If you do any of those things that have been mentioned, please stop immediately.
Right. We will talk about you.
Yes. And we cannot guarantee what is in your coffee mug.
That's right.
Right. So I know with growth, working with clients at our agency, that there is always this moment when the company moves from the owner having his hand or her hand or their hand in everything. They are the brand, right? Their personal beliefs and values are the ones that inform the decisions on a daily basis. And then it grows, and they get further and further removed from where the action is. Right. And now the brand has to do most of the heavy lifting, right? What has that transition been for you? And what are some of the things that you've done to make sure that the experience that you personally used to deliver when you were behind the counter, when you were interacting with every customer, when you had your hand in everything, that is still permeates? And I feel like it's probably even more challenging when you have that merger, right?
That's a great question. I think that is probably the core concern with scale, right? I mean, certainly as an owner that was obsessed with quality, obsessed with hospitality, customer service, all the little details. I can be pretty picky about the details. I've definitely had to learn to back off some. I think building your team and then trusting them is key. I used to be in the spaces every day, in the beginning, open to close, right? So I saw anything that happened in the space, any person that came in, I at least had some interaction with. I think finding the right people, communicating your values, but then also relying on their skill sets and the fact that I want to surround myself with people that are better at me than all these, things that we have to juggle. And I don't think no business, no new endeavor is one person. It really takes a team. And I love having I love having a team of talented people and giving them autonomy and trust to do it, as long as we're communicating together on what the vision is. Even if it's not exactly the way I would do it, learning to let go and letting people, take things, even if it's in a slightly different direction, as long as we're, in general, going the way we want. I think you kind of have to. If you try to too tightly control everything, it becomes miserable.
Yeah.
You're always going to be looking at the things like, oh, I would have done that differently.
Yeah. And it's so easy to fall into that trap.
Yep.
So what are some of those core beliefs and values that serve as a through line between the locations and the brands?
We do have some formal things, pen to paper, but more high level. I think it's quality, and it's a concern. It's it's a care for others, a care for our customers, a care for each other on the team and our staff. Those are certainly the threads that I value in the business. And you win some and you lose some. You can't always get everything 100, but I think as long as when we make mistakes, if we pull back and try to keep aligning with those values, then we'll continue to be successful. And with scale, you realize that there's always got to be a little compromise, right? Because you go from 1-2 locations to suddenly, if you have 10, 15, 100 locations, you have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
And that's what I constantly remind myself, my business partners, our team. Like, let's not get so hyper focused on this one thing that we think is that important when there's 100 things we need to handle, and sometimes you have to just let go, not hold on to it too tightly, and then the things that are really important to our business, really important to ourselves, we can say, no, we're not going to be flexible with this. But otherwise, I think creating a great work environment where people feel like their voices are heard and they have a say. That's how you build a successful brand.
What are some of the leadership qualities that you've had to learn and to flex with that scale?
Qualities that I've had to learn. Back to your point of empathy that you had mentioned earlier. I think being empathetic and really listening to other people is really key. And I'm a firm believer in leading by, I want to lead by example. I think that's really key, because you can tell someone all day what you want them to do or or the right way to do something. But if you're not doing that same thing, then it's just, it's hypocritical. So I've definitely learned a lot in the early days when it was a very small team. Any sort of HR dispute as a small team, it killed me. I was just like, I hated conflict. I don't love conflict in general. I'm sort of a conflict averse people. I like people. I like maintaining good relationships. And so I've let things go over the years sometimes that have not kept boundaries clear, because I'm like, I don't want to be mean, So I think that's been a growing process for me, is learning how to be assertive, also create boundaries in these things that are essential, but also still creating a great work environment and a good business. So,
I think that the kind of candor that you are talking about is probably by far the area of growth in terms of leadership for me. It's just like, and I even have to remind myself that that kind of candor is also empathetic, right? Like that. Yep. At times it feels like it doesn't feel that way, but to really be candid with someone might sting in the moment, but I think there is so much empathy there when you are pointing out an area of growth in a junior person, or if you are pointing out a deficiency or a blind spot into a partner. Like I feel like those conversations are so difficult to have, at least for me, and the way I kind of force myself to have them is through this empathetic lens. Like, it's reminding myself, no. It's actually empathetic for you to overcome this resistance to those conversations on behalf of the personal growth or the long-term well-being of this person.
Right.
Yeah,
certainly taking the easy way out in the immediate is to avoid a conversation or ignore something that you see that you need to address. But in any long-term plan, you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you don't address those things. And I like that point, that it's actually the empathetic thing to do, because it's hard. When you're a leader, and certainly when your team grows, whether you're a shop manager at a single location or you're one of our operations manager that manages multiple locations, people ultimately the hardest and most rewarding part of our business is people. And there's 120 people in our company right now, and that's a lot of personalities, a lot of emotion, a lot of everyone's got their individual story,
Yep.
everyone's got their issues, everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses, and it's tough to get it all running smoothly. But communication's huge.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called Radical Candor. A couple chapters
It's
in.
been on my reading list. I haven't gotten around to it.
I'm just like 2 chapters in or something,
Okay.
2 or 3 chapters.
See,
But I'll let you know when it's done.
Even the fact that I haven't picked up the book
Yeah,
yet,
there you go.
this is the book that I need the most, and this is the last book I pick up. Yes, please. Let me know how it is. I definitely need to read it next. Yeah,
I'll loan you my copy when I'm done.
that sounds good. I just finished, speaking of books, I recently finished an amazing book by Greg Hoffman, who's the former CMO at Nike.
Okay.
And the name of the book is Emotion by Design. And he's really just talking about how intentional it is at Nike. The way we feel about Nike and its product and the brand is not accidental. Like
Right.
it's carefully created and crafted by the people at Nike. They have a specific idea of how they want us to feel when we interact with the brand at any touch point, whether it's a product, an experience, or a piece of creative that they put out into the world. Like, how do you want people to feel when they walk into the spaces that you've created like this?
How do I want them to feel? Well, I have said in the past, and I agree with this, that I think ultimately when someone walks into a coffee shop, because I know how I feel when I travel and I go into a space, you want to feel good, you want to feel cool, you want to feel like you're in a place that is energetic, and I think ultimately I just want my customers when they walk in to feel like, oh, I'm in a cool place. I feel good here. My interaction at the register has been great. My drink is great, and I feel part of something.
Yeah.
I want it to be interesting.
One thing that has always been fascinating to me when I think about this kind of experience, but I think any artist experiences this. So when you are thinking about creating an experience and creating an experience, do you think about all the variety of people that will walk through the door and really try to account for like the mixture of their experiences to come up with a concept? Or do you really design something for yourself in hopes that other people
will
correct with
preferences?
yeah?
It's a little of both. I definitely think, with Not Just Coffee, which was our original brand, a lot of the aesthetics, a lot of the vibe are things that I very much enjoy and appreciate. The design, the architecture behind it, and growing Night Swim with partners. It's more of an eclectic. It's a little more, multiple personalities and perspectives in there, and I'm fine with that because you can't do everything. But I try to think in terms of how other people will enjoy the space too. But ultimately, I like to pick the furniture.
Yeah. So if you were to describe your style, like let's say this is a GQ interview.
Fair enough.
And they're asking you, about to give them a little bit insight about your style and your sensitivity. Like how do you describe it to someone?
Minimalist. Sort of modern Scandinavian minimalist is my, is my aesthetic. If I was to pick one, I'm just kind of making up words here, but clean lines. I don't like clutter. It's the constant battle between my wife and I at home. It's like, if there's a table, I don't want anything on it.
Okay. So clean lines, minimalist. I feel like
neutral color palette.
Okay. But the thing that I really like, one of my design thing or one of my aesthetic stuff is juxtaposition. I really love when things are juxtaposed.
Yep.
Like when I think about fashion, for example, like that's a word that I really gravitate toward. It's like trying to bring together pieces of clothing that traditionally don't go together. And I feel like I get a sense of that juxtaposition when I'm in your spaces,
cool.
right?
I
think there is this like very modern. The clean line, but I think it's also juxtaposed with some like a little bit of ruggedness. You have the industrial look here that add a little bit of like ruggedness to the space, and
For
some of the eclectic pieces juxtaposed with the more modern, slick look to it.
Yeah, I like the variety, and I like the industrial space. I like taking a shell, and that's what really attracted me to this space when I first saw it with Garrett. But like our Atherton Mill location, our Dilworth location, 7th Street, they are kind of industrial spaces. I like unfinished textures. So like when they did this wall here, they were originally going to put the sheetrock up at the top, but I asked them to leave it because I wanted to see what was under it, and I wanted to see the conduit for the electrical. I think that's interesting. I think it can get overdone, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, but I just think this building is cool.
Yes.
And yeah, I like seeing all the sort of guts of things exposed as well, and then like you said, juxtapositioned against a sleek marble or quartz countertop.
No, I love it.
Cool.
I love it.
Yeah,
I think
thanks.
there's something to that I'm personally a sucker for.
Nice. Well, I've joked that opening coffee shops I get to live out my interior designer fantasy, which is like a huge architecture design. Those are things that are probably in my top top 5 interests, and getting to do them in my business spaces is really cool.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. So I feel like we're probably toward the end of this conversation now. I want to end on a question that maybe is a big question. Maybe you've had plenty of time to reflect on that. But like, how do you want to be remembered? I'm always so interested in, I feel like that question is such a powerful one in helping us decide how we want to walk this earth,
Yeah. Man, you just went from interior design to just straight up philosophy.
I really need to start scripting this because this is like a bad playlist.
This is
like a bad playlist where like you go from hard rock to like.
It's great. It's eclectic. Man, I mean that is a incredibly powerful question, and certainly one I've thought about. I mean, I definitely want to be remembered, and I want to be remembered for someone who contributed positively to people's experience.
Yeah.
I think that's easier said than done. I'll say I don't want to be remembered as like, oh, James, that asshole, that guy, he finally kicked the bucket. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of wonderful people in my life, and my family, and my kids, and my friends, and my siblings. And I want them to remember me with good thoughts and fond memories. And also, I've, like all of us, we've experienced big loss in life, and people that we love who pass away. And I mean, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but it's also the inevitable part of our human experience.
Yeah.
None of us are getting out of here alive.
Nope.
So let's make the most of it.
Yeah. Well, James, Giacomo.
There you go, Giacomo.
This was, as expected, an amazing conversation. And if you treat anyone and everyone that crossed your path the way you've treated me, then I think you're going to be remembered as exactly the person that you want to be remembered. So thank you.
Thanks, Junior. Right back at you.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Good.
Thanks, man.